Imagine it. The year is 1837. Syria has an earthquake so massive that it kills thousands. In England, there's a poet that is smack-talking Charlotte Bronte for being a woman. And then at the same time, there's a woman who ascends to the throne, and her name is Victoria. Charles Lyell confirms evolution to a geographical society in London, and Alexander Pushkin, a Russian poet, enters into a duel but doesn't make it out. The first long-distance railway opens in England, and the name of a sauce that I can't pronounce is invented by two pharmacists. The first modern university on this side of the Mediterranean was founded in Athens, the University of Athens, by the king. And then in Canada, the black citizens were given the right to vote. 7 professors write a letter protesting the fact that the Kingdom of Hanover has abolished its constitution. There are riots going on in New York based on the high cost of flour and the crazy amount of poverty happening. Michigan and Texas are officially states, and Chicago is officially a city. The printing press is patented, and John Deere makes his first steel plow. Charles Goodyear files for the first rubber patent. Tiffany & Company is opened officially, and the first women's college is opened in Massachusetts. The U.S. forces defeat the Seminoles in battle, and then our 8th president, a Democrat, has been inaugurated. It was only a few months into Martin Van Buren's presidency that the Panic of 1837 kicks in. Now this ends with this is basically a depression that lasts for 5 years, so past the time that he ends up being president. And a lot of times when a new presidency starts, and soon after, or around that time, there's a huge economic problem, people often blame the sitting president. But as is the case with many of these situations, Martin Van Buren was not the cause of this financial crisis. It started in the last presidency with Jackson. Yes, just when you thought we were done talking about Andrew Jackson, he comes back. But it was a lot of what he did. I was talking about in the last video with the second bank of the U.S., the fact that he kind of closed it all of a sudden, and the whole war he had, personal vendetta against the bank the whole time, led to some serious economic consequences that bled over into Martin Van Buren's presidency. And it starts with the fact of inflation. When he shut down the banks, there were no regulations, and the economy kind of just took advantage. The banks took advantage, and like inflation and cost of everything just soared. Since the turn of the 19th century, the economy had been a lot of highs and lows. There'd be great economic booms and then busts, and it just kind of kept going like this. And then, so it didn't start with Jackson, but Jackson, before he left, dissolving the bank, kind of blew it up. Of course, though, Van Buren didn't really help the situation too much. He continued on with some policies from Jackson, which kind of got us into the situation to begin with. So when he did try to help, it was focused on government spending. He even went as far as to cut spending so severely for the government that they even had, Public Works had to sell the tools they were using to create the infrastructure. While he wasn't necessarily helping too much with the economy, he was keeping the idea of slavery in his thoughts, because he really wasn't for slavery. And that's one of the reasons why he was kind of slow moving when it came to annexing Texas. He did not want another slave state to enter the Union, and he also did not want a war with Mexico. But speaking of foreign entities, there was a whole rebellion going on in Canada. and you have some Americans getting involved, and Van Buren was like, stay out. The issue was between Canada and England, and he didn't want to be part of it. In fact, one of our ships got confiscated by the British, and an American died and several others were injured. It was called the Caroline. Another big issue that happened during the Van Buren presidency is the ship Amistad, which was a ship that was Cuban, but it had come from West Africa, basically taking people from there to be slaves. And the people that were boarded on the ships that were going to be sold as slaves basically took the ship over, and they sailed the ship not to Cuba exactly, but they went up the East Coast and landed in the U.S., to Connecticut to be exact. And these people were put in jail for having taken over the ship and illegally sailing it. But it was a whole issue because they weren't Spanish-speaking Latinos like the manifest said on the ship. They were actually stolen from their lands, and it was really trying to figure out if what was the legal issue around it, because of all the things that the issue arise. Were they property? Were they people? That was all of the situation. But in the end, they did end up being sent back to Africa to be where they were taken from originally. And the last big thing that Van Buren was responsible for was on America's 64th birthday, the Treasury Act, which basically kept the Treasury, the U.S. Treasury, separate from U.S. banks. So, some independence there. And then Van Buren lost his bid for re-election that November. So while Van Buren had one term, and that sounds short, you haven't seen anything yet. Stay tuned for the next video about the shortest tenure as president, in the form of President Harrison.